Let me ask you something before we get into this. What do you do when the life you worked for, the one that actually worked, stops meaning anything? Not because it failed, not because you made bad decisions, but because the people who made it worth building aren't there anymore. Most of us know the answer we're supposed to give. You push through. You keep going. You throw yourself into work because at least work gives you somewhere to be. Jude Harper did that too. For a while. And then one day he just didn't. He sold the house, closed the business, got in his car, and drove across Scotland with 9 months of savings, zero plan, and no idea if he'd ever come back to the life he'd left behind. This is not a story about someone chasing a dream. It's a story about someone who had to figure out how to want things again. And I think it's one of the most quietly devastating and quietly hopeful stories I've come across in a long time. To understand what Jude walked away from, you need to understand what he'd actually built. Around 2015, he started a hand-dyed yarn business called Stranded Dye Works. And before you gloss over that detail, this wasn't some Etsy hobby. He grew it over nearly 8 years, from his parents' kitchen into a proper industrial dye studio with a weekly video podcast, a loyal following, and enough income to own a house and live a stable, structured life. He was good at it. He was known for it. And that kitchen, where he first learned to mix colors, where the whole thing began, belonged to his mom and dad. That detail is going to matter in about 2 minutes. By 2023, Stranded Dye Works had become something real. Something respected. From the outside, Jude's life looked sorted. Career, home, routine, purpose. But here's the thing about building a life that's tied to people. When those people go, the life doesn't disappear. It just becomes a shell of itself. Still standing. Still running. But hollow in a way that's almost worse than collapse. Because collapse at least gives you permission to stop. Jude didn't get that permission. He had to take it himself. His mother got her diagnosis first. Then, before that grief had anywhere near finished settling, his father was diagnosed too, one after the other. Now I'm not going to pretend I can describe what that does to a person. But Jude has talked about 2 specific things that hit me harder than anything else in his story. The first is this. Every single week, he used to send his mom photos, not big updates, not milestones. Just small pictures of whatever he was working on that week. A project he'd started. Something he'd fixed. Just a quiet way of saying, hey, here's what I've been up to. That ritual ended. Not because he chose to stop. Because there was no one left to receive it. The second thing, his father was a man of tools. Hammers. Saws. Measuring tapes. The kind of equipment that lives in a shed and carries years of fingerprints. Those tools ended up following Jude to a stone cottage in rural Scotland that didn't even exist in the picture yet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What I want you to sit with for a second is the kind of grief Jude was carrying. It wasn't just the loss of 2 people. It was the loss of the entire context that made his life make sense. The kitchen where his business was born. Gone. The woman who got those weekly photos. Gone. The man whose tools sat in storage. Gone. And Jude was still standing in the middle of a business, a house, a routine. A whole life built around people who no longer existed. He started asking a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. Why am I still doing any of this? Here is where most stories insert a turning point. A therapist. A trip abroad. A moment of clarity in the shower. That's not what happened. In 2024, Jude closed Stranded Dye Works after nearly a decade. He listed the house. And then, with 9 months of savings and genuinely nothing else, he got in his car and started driving. No short list of places. No spreadsheet. No plan. He has described himself, his whole life, as someone who has backup plans for his backup plans. Methodical. Careful. He thinks things through. This time, he had nothing. He looked at properties on the Isle of Skye, in Inverness, along the west coast. And then something stopped him. A small stone cottage in rural Aberdeenshire. Thick walls. Low ceilings. An attached barn with serious structural problems. Less than an acre of land. Water from a well. Heat from a fireplace. He moved in with what he could carry and a head full of uncertainty. He would later describe it as simultaneously the freest and most terrifying thing he'd ever done. And he said something about it that I keep coming back to. That it's easy to stay miserable, because staying miserable feels like the safer option. He chose the harder one. Now, if you were hoping for the peaceful countryside montage, man bakes bread, sits by fire, finds himself. I have to disappoint you. The first weeks in that cottage were, in Jude's own words, genuinely awful. He had no idea how a septic tank worked. He didn't know how to manage a private water supply. He had no background in construction, plumbing, or rural land management. And he didn't know a single person in the area. The well ran dry. Weeks without running water. No hot water at all. Smoke filling the cottage at 3 a.m. when something came down the chimney. The barn was deteriorating. The land was overgrown. And his savings were draining week by week, whether anything got fixed or not. There were 2 weeks, he's admitted, where he was fully convinced he'd made the worst mistake of his life. And the silence. It had weight. No colleagues. No casual conversation. No background hum of a shared life. Just wind and stone walls and the slow realization that wanting a fresh start and actually surviving one are two very different things. But here's what kept him from turning the car around. In a shed on that property sat a box of tools. Hammers, saws, measuring tapes, his father's tools. Every time Jude reached for one of them, he was holding something his father had held, building something new with the instruments of a man who was gone. That shed didn't just hold equipment. It held the closest thing to company he had. Remember those weekly photos he used to send his mom? The impulse behind them never left. The need to show someone. To share the small wins and the mess and the progress. That need was still there. It just had nowhere to go. So Jude picked up a camera. He wasn't building a brand. He wasn't trying to go viral. He was a man who had lost the people he used to share his daily life with, looking for another way to keep that impulse alive. He started a channel called Rewilding Jude. Just filming his days. The cottage, the projects, the failures, the things that went wrong, and the things that went right. His third upload was a simple walkthrough of the cottage. No script. No production. Just Jude moving through these rundown stone rooms, talking to camera. He thought maybe a few hundred people from his old knitting community might watch it. That video has over 400,000 views. The channel now has over 150,000 subscribers and more than 10 million total views. Every Sunday, without fail, a new video goes up. And what drove the growth wasn't lighting or editing or algorithm strategy. It was the disasters. The wrong measurements. The structures he tore down and rebuilt from scratch. The chicken coop he planned in 3 weeks that took 3 months and became so elaborate viewers started calling it a palace. He leaves the mistakes in. Because as he puts it, otherwise the videos would be very short. People write paragraphs in the comments about watching through their own bereavements, through illness, through periods where they needed proof that starting over was survivable. It's not a typical comment section. It's something closer to a quiet support group built around a man and his crumbling cottage. Today, Jude grows vegetables from beds he built himself. He keeps 4 rescued hens. Birds that were dazed from slaughter when he brought them home to that ridiculous over-engineered coop. He said they were the most unexpectedly joyful thing to arrive in his life since the move. A man who lost both parents. Who drove across a country with no destination. Who stood in a smoke-filled cottage in the dark wondering if he'd ruined everything. That man now walks out every morning, with his father's tools in the shed and 4 birds who needed someone as much as he needed them. And every Sunday, he picks up the camera. Walks through the cottage, the garden, the coop. Shows the world what he's been working on. He's essentially doing the same thing he was doing when he sent those photos to his mom. The person he built that habit for is gone. But the habit refused to die. It just found a new address. I think about that a lot. Because most people, when they lose the person they were doing something for, they stop doing the thing. Jude didn't. And I don't know if that's grief or stubbornness or just the way some people are wired. But I think it might be the bravest thing in the whole story. If something in this hit close to home, if there's something you kept doing after the person you did it for was gone, or something you stopped and wonder if you should have kept going, say it in the comments. Because based on the thousands of people writing on Jude's videos every week, a lot of us are carrying this around quietly. It's worth saying out loud.